Hi, my name is Faran and I'm currently finished my master's in applied mathematics and computer science from MIPT. I would say my most recent work has been around LLM safety, interpretability, and activation level methods. And If I talk about myself, why does activation like this AI alignment matter to me? So for me, I would say alignment became interesting when I started working with models directly and saw how their behavior actually could become outside the setting in which they were particularly evaluated. So for this, I would say my master thesis actually, which is a guard prep, was focused on safety alignment using parameter efficient fine tuning techniques, and I trained a compact model to make structured safety judgments, also identify violation categories, and even provide a reasoning critic. So the interesting part came when I would say moved beyond the training distribution. So the model performed, I would say, for my research, performed reasonably really well on these domains it has already seen. But when I tested this on unseen ethical domains, I found that it could particularly become overly cautious in some cases, and even fail to generalize its notion of safety properly. And I call this thing as this failure mode as something known as alignment overfitting. And this experience changed my perspective, I think, particularly about alignment. So first of all, I became less interested in asking only does this model get a good safety score, and more interesting questions like what has the model actually learned. So which internal representations are also responsible for the behavior, also what happens to those representations when we actually try to fine tune or otherwise modify this model. So I would say I then experimented with something known as activation steering, and is like a training-free remedy technique of changing safety-related behavior, like a training-free way of changing safety-related behavior. And this was particularly interesting for me because it gave me a way to work directly with the model internal representations without changing its weights. So alignment matters to me, I would probably say, because I think eventually you will need methods that are not only, I would say, behaviorally effective, but also robust to distribution shift model and even model updates and even adversarial, I would say, pressure. And I'm especially interested in approaches where we can actually run experiments and test the mechanism rather than just observing the final behavior. And if I talk about if for your second question, that which research direction actually interests me, of the directions I actually read about, the one I am more interested is the work on, I would say, self interpretation through adapter probes. That I really like this basic idea instead of always relying on external interpreter, because we can now train a lightweight adapter that has a frozen model and translate its own internal activation into natural language. And what I found especially interesting is that the base model doesn't have to be modified. This makes the setup much cleaner for interpretability, because we are now trying to understand the original model rather than a model that has been changed to explain itself. And my main critique is that a good sounding explanation is not necessarily a faithful explanation. So for example, a model might generate something that sounds exactly right, because it has learned a statistical, I would say, mapping from activations to particular language. So but that doesn't necessarily mean that explanation is causally connected to what the model is actually trying to produce its behavior. So the direction I would extend this is as I have already told, if have you read about my answer to the particular question above, is what I call interpretability continuity. So I would like to test whether safety relevant concepts remain I would say causally identifiable when the model changes. For example, after fine tuning, pruning, or even distillation, even when the original representation itself has moved. And I would make the interpreter actually make predictions that we can actually, for example, test. For example, suppose the interpreter says that particular activation is representing some safety. relevant concept, and I would then ask it to predict what should happen if we increase or maybe suppress that particular activation. And then we like perform, I would say, a blinded intervention. I would like check whether the predicted behavioral change actually occurs, and this like actually gives us a stronger, I would say, standard than just asking whether generated explanation like sounds, I would say, right. So it also creates a very interesting, I would say, failure mode. The representation now can like change completely, but maybe the underlying concept it is still recoverable. So for example, or perhaps ordinary model like updates destroy the interpretability interface much faster than they destroy the behavior itself. And this is what I want to test first. I would like start with a relatively small language model, like a small language model SLM, and introduce, I would say, a controlled hidden objective or trigger, and then apply a repeated, I would say, pruning or even fine tuning or distillation. And at each particular stage, I would then compare ordinary self interpretation with an interpreter that has to make these blinded causal predictions. And the most, I would say, after that, I would say, interesting result to me would actually be, I would say, that like if fairly ordinary model updates cause the causal interpretability signal to like disappear, even when the model is like trained to preserve it, the model like would tell that model that would tell us something important about our how fragile our access to internal mechanism really is. And I particularly think that this direction actually fits very well with my previous words, because like I have already worked with, I would say, parameter efficient fine tuning, safety alignment, and activation steering, but it will also push me to answer this particular research question I haven't fully answered yet. Not just whether we can change a model's internal state, but like whether we can reliably understand that the state, I would say, as a model changes. So this is the kind of work I wanted to do when I have been accepted at this particular fellowship. So I would be looking forward to work with you guys in this particular fellowship, and I will be happy to become a part of this. Thank you. That's it from my side.